Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sadhana Lalita Shri Vishakhanikanscha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaurabhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaurabhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaurabhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
If you're all set, we can start.
Yeah, we can start, Prabhu. So, Prabhu,
Yeah.
will somebody be sharing the screen?
Yes, Prabhu. I will share it. Not a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna, devotees. Welcome to Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya on a Saturday morning. Today we have the privilege of having His Grace Rama Govinda Ratisa, Prabhu. So today we would hear the nectar from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 29, and verses 84 and 85. Prabhu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. We will start with the invocation prayers. Om Agyana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtike Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Mukham karoti vachalam pangum langayati giram yat kripatamaham vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Vishwan. Hare Krishna. So Welcome everyone to the Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya sessions, which our temple is conducting. I'm sure that there is a change in time this week onwards, so all of you have to get adjusted to the new time. We were doing, I think this was a time which was followed in the past during COVID. I'm not sure, but of late, it was 8:15, and now we have rolled back to 7:15. Nevertheless, thank you so much for coming, attending today. We will be discussing on the verse which is on your screen now, which is fourth canto, 29th chapter, 84th and 85th. So today we'll be discussing on two verses, which is 84th and 85th. Okay, so we'll start with the verse which is Etan Mukunda Yashasa Bhuvanam Punanam. Etan Mukunda Yashasa Bhuvanam Punanam Devarshivariya Mukhanishrutam Shaucham Yakirtyamanamadigatchati Parameshtyam Nasmin Bhave Bhramati Mukta Samasta Bandha. Meanings: Etat, the synonyms: Etat, this narration, Mukunda Yashasa, with the fame of Lord Krishna, Bhuvanam, this material world, Punanam, sanctifying, Devarshi, of the great sages, Varya, of the chief, Mukha, from the mouth, Nishratam, uttered, Atma Shaucham, purifying the heart, Yah, anyone who, Kirtyamanam, being chanted, Adigachati, goes back, Parameshtyam, to the spiritual world, Na, never, Asmin, in this, Bhave, material world, Brahmati, wanders, Mukta, being liberated, Samasta, from all, Bandha, bondage. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: this narration spoken by the great sage Narada is full of the transcendental fame of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, this narration, when described, certainly sanctifies this material world. It purifies the heart of the living entity and helps him attain his spiritual identity. One who relates this transcendental narration will be liberated from all material bondage and will no longer have to wander within this material world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As indicated in the verse 79, Narada Muni advised King Prachina Barhi to take to devotional service rather than waste time performing ritualistic ceremonies and fruitive activities. The vivid descriptions of the subtle and gross bodies in this chapter are most scientific, and because they are given by the great sage Narada, they are authoritative. Because these narrations are full of the glory of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they constitute the most effective process for the purification of the mind. As Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu confirmed, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, the more we talk of Krishna, think of Krishna, and preach for Krishna, the more we become purified. This means we no longer have to accept a hallucinatory, gross, and subtle body, but instead attain our spiritual identity. One who tries to understand this instructive spiritual knowledge is delivered from the ocean of nescience. The word Parameshtyam is very significant in this connection. Parameshtyam is also called as Brahmaloka. It is a planet on which Lord Brahma lives. The inhabitants of Brahmaloka always discuss such narrations so that after the annihilation of the material world, they can be directly transferred to the spiritual world. One who is transferred to the spiritual world does not have to go up and down within this material world. Sometimes spiritual activities are also called as Parameshtyam. So we will be discussing in detail about this verse, and then we'll go to the next verse. So in this, we see in the purport, in the beginning itself, it is mentioned very clearly that as indicated in the verse number 79, in the purport, if you see, it is written as indicated in the verse number 79. So we are now discussing about verse number 84 and 85. So in the verse number 79, it was concluded that devotional service is topmost, and that Narada Muni was instructing King Prachina Barhi to render favorable devotional service to the Lord without wasting time on ritualistic activities or fruitive activities, which are prescribed in the Vedas. So the point here is that Narada Muni is stressing very clearly on devotional service. So there was something which was going wrong. So if you actually see, Prachina Barhi is coming from a very strong lineage. He comes from the lineage of Maharaja Prithu. So Maharaj Prathu, just to give a bit of summary of the whatever we have discussed in the past, I'll just summarize in maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So Vijitashva was the eldest son of Maharaja Prathu, and Vijitashva was also called as Antardhana. So Maharaja Vijitashva, who was the eldest son of Prathu Maharaj, he had 2 wives, and one of them was Nabhaswati. The first one was Shikandini, and the second one was Nabhaswati. So Shikandini had given birth to 3 sons, and Nabhaswati had 1 son, who is Havirdhana. So Havirdhana was married to Havirdhani, and they had 6 sons, and one of them was Barishat. So Barishat is nothing but Maharaja Barishat, who is also known as Prachina Bari. So Prachina Bari was ordered by Brahma to marry the daughter of the ocean, who is Shatadruti. And Shatadruti was very beautiful, and even the Devatas were so engrossed with her beauty that they were witnessing their marriage. The marriage between Prachina Bari and that is Maharaj Barishat and Shatadruti was also witnessed by all the Devatas, and even Agni, the fire of sacrifice, where in the sacrificial fire, when the man and the woman take the vows, there also Agni was also witnessing the beauty of Shatadruti. He was also captured by the beauty of Shatadruti. She was so beautiful. So Maharaja Barishat, that is Prachina Barhi, got married to Shatadruti, and they had 10 children who are the Prachitas. And Prachitas were informed by their father to go to the forest and meditate, because they have to marry and beget children. So the Prachitas, on the order of their father, they go to the forest to meditate, and on the way, when they are heading for their activity, for the spiritual activity, for the tapasya, on the way they have interaction with Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva, as a spiritual master, he recites the Rudra Gita. He gives them information on the methods of performing this sacrifice or performing this yajna, by which they can follow the father's instructions and successfully execute it. So Lord Shiva recites the Rudra Gita, and the Rudra Gita is at the end of the recitation. There are about 30 to 40 verses, and these verses are actually recited by Lord Shiva, and the Prachitas, they hear this, and after the recitation, Lord Shiva concludes that the Prachitas have to meditate and they have to repeat this till they get to meet Lord Vishnu. So the Prachitas go underwater, and after hearing this, the Rudra Gita from Lord Shiva, they head towards, they go under the water, they meditate there for 10,000 years, after which Lord Vishnu appears on his Garuda, and there is an interaction between Lord Vishnu and Prachitas, which happens in the next chapter. So far what is known to us is, so far they are still performing this austerities and sacrifices, and in the meantime, Prachina Barhi, their father, is also performing a lot of materialistic activities, activities in the sense, the activities which provide fruitive results, which are prescribed in the Vedas, or the Vedic activities which are prescribed in the scriptures. Those he is performing, and he's performing it in such a way that there are a lot of animal sacrifices also happening. So Narada Muni becomes very compassionate after seeing this particular episode, where on one side the sons of Prachina Barhi are favorably engaged in the devotional service under the guidance of Lord Shiva, who acts as a spiritual master for the sons of Prachina Barhi. On the other side, we have Prachina Barhi himself, who, although comes from such a great lineage of Prathu Maharaj, still he has forgotten his roots, and he's performing fruitive activities which are prescribed in the Vedas, which provide temporary results and are not permanent or eternally benefiting for the jiva. So Narada Muni becomes very compassionate, and then he comes to give instructions to Prachina Barhi, and Prachina Barhi is very welcomes him very warmly, and he accepts the instructions of. He is willing to accept the instructions of Narada Muni. So Narada Muni, and later on the interactions. So there are 2 parallel activities which are happening here. One, the tapasya of the Prachitas. On the other hand, their father. So sometimes we say that, if we perform devotional service, then 21 generations ahead and behind get liberated. So you can see here the favorable arrangement of the Lord. On one side, the children are practicing devotional service, and on the other side, we can see that Narada Muni has already started his work of getting Prachina Barhi on the right track, which was also followed by all his previous, all the ancestors of Prachina Barhi. So the interaction starts in a way where Narada Muni first starts with a a story. Basically, this is a creation of Narada Muni, and he discusses about Puranjana and Puranjani. There is a king called Puranjana and how he gets attracted to Puranjani. In short, Puranjana is nothing but this Atma, or the conditioned soul, which is seated in the body of 9 gates. Navadware Pure Dehe. So our body is having 9 holes, and there is a soul, the individual soul, which is seated in the body. And then there is a super soul who's constantly guiding him. But at the same time, it is the choice of the jiva whether he has to surrender to the super soul or whether he has to be driven by the activities of his material intelligence. So Puranjana and Puranjani, the example is given where Puranjana is nothing but the individual soul and Puranjani is the material intelligence. So Puranjana, basically it is nothing but an explanation of the life of Prachina Bhari himself. And Narada Muni wants to warn Prachina Bhari that if he does fruitive activities, which gives temporary results, that will be a cause of his bondage in this material world, which will make him stay back. So he wants to guide him on the matter of spiritual duties. So he gives this allegory of Puranjana and Puranjani. So Puranjana, as I said, is the soul, the conditioned living entity, conditioned soul, and Puranjani is nothing but the material intelligence, which makes us drive towards material activities. Similarly, there is also another resident in this body. So there are 2 residents in this body. One resident is Puranjana, who stays in the body, who is a conditioned soul that each one of us is, and not just for Puranjana, not just Prachina Bhari, even I am a conditioned soul. So now we have to understand there is one more soul which is present in the body, which is Avigyata. So Avigyata is a super soul who wants to constantly remind us that the goal of this life is devotional service, rendering favorable devotional service, loving devotional service, and return back to the abode of the Lord. So now we can understand here that through the entire series, we understand that one, the importance of lineage. Second, the parents, when they are born in very cultural or traditional families, the values that they pass on to their children are very important. So here we see that the Prachetas were given the right knowledge that if they have to do any activity or if they have to be successful in any activity, they have to be dependent on the Lord, and you have to perform austerities and penances. It is not by our own endeavors that we get the result, but it is only by the mercy of the Lord. The jiva desires, the material nature has to facilitate, and the super soul's sanctions. So we know that. So similarly, Prachina Bhari, although he guided his children on the right track, he himself was on the wrong track. So he was performing all the scriptural duties, the Vedic duties, but these are all for fruitive. He was expecting some fruitive results. So Narada Muni was thus advised, and then in this particular verse, we can see that the description is there about. There is a conclusion. Basically, in the 79th verse, the conclusion was given that devotional service is the topmost. Now, the things that I was saying, that is, for example, the Puranjana, the person who's residing in the body, the conditioned soul, actually he does not know that he is getting the knowledge from whatever intelligence he has. That intelligence is derived from the super soul, which is also sitting within the heart. So the Mundaka Upanishad says, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad says that Samane Vriksho Vrikshe Purusho Magno. Samane Vrikshe Purusho Nimagno. Nishaya Shochati Muhyamana. Justam Yada Pashyati Anyamisham. Asya Mahimanam Etivita Shoka. So here it says that Samane Vrikshe Purusho Nimagno. Srila Prabhupada actually quotes this verse at many places in the Bhagavad Gita and in Chaitanya Charitamrita, even in Srimad Bhagavatam. There are places where this particular verse is given as a reference, where it says that there are 2 individuals who are staying in this body. One is the soul, and the other one is the super soul. So here in this verse, it says that Samane Vrikshe Purusho Nimagno. So there are 2 birds which are seated on the tree. One bird is very busy and very busy in enjoying the materialistic activities. It is trying to enjoy the fruits of the trees, but it is always in anxiety. We would have seen the birds. Usually, if you see any bird, the bird is always very anxious. It is very disturbed. It is not sitting in a very peaceful, relaxed manner. If you see a mother cow, for example, you can see that it is always relaxed. There is no stress or there is no anxiety. But if you see a bird is that always anxious. It is very fearful, and it is very disturbed. So that is why the jiva, the conditioned living entity, is considered to that bird which is always anxious. There is always anxiety. There is always concern and worry. What is going to happen next? Will I be able to do something now? Will I get the fruits of my action? So there is always a concern and moroseness because of the activities that he does. There is also sadness that he gets because as long as he does not turn towards the Lord, whose other bird, whose avigyata, or the other bird which is seated on this in the same body or which is seated on the same tree, there is another bird which is nothing but avigyata or the super soul, who's seated within the body. As long as he does not turn to him, there is no source of happiness. So we have to understand the difference between the Atma and the Paramatma. So the Paramatma is seated in the heart, but the activities that we do does not, although they are both there in the same body, they are there, they are residents on the same body, which is made of 9 gates. Still, the Lord does not get affected by the activities of the individual jiva. So the Lord is beyond the modes of material nature, and he never gets affected by the modes of material nature, whereas the jiva gets trapped by the modes of material nature. So the objective is somehow, if this particular bird, which is the individual soul, or which is the conditioned living entity, if somehow he turns his face to his friend who is avigyata, or to the other bird, which is just an observer, but does not get any reactions for the actions that the conditioned soul is doing, if this particular person or the conditioned living entity or we somehow turn towards the Lord for guidance, then we will be free from all our anxieties and miseries. So the point here is that the soul and the living and the super soul both are residing in the same body. One, there is a chance for one getting entangled by the material intelligence and the material activities, whereas the other is not at all getting entangled by any of these things. But the Lord is always eager to welcome us back to his abode, where we can be free from anxiety and distress. So that is why a person who is fully self-realized, he is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita as Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. He is always joyful. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na shochati na kangshati. He never laments or desires to have anything. He has already got the topmost. We saw that His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Swami Maharaj, when he left his body, he gave a very beautiful message. He says that this Krishna consciousness is a treasure. So he says, keep it very close to your heart. Keep it very close to you. Don't lose it. Now, we know this message that if you actually hear the message of Kadamba Kanana Swami Maharaj, it is not something which is new or spoken for the first time. It is spoken many times. We have heard about it. But the most important thing is the context, the time at which His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Swami Maharaj gave that message. I think Maharaj gave that message somewhere on 26th of March and I think 9th of April. Or I'm sorry if the dates are wrong, but for the video of Maharaj's departure and also the day when this video was actually uploaded. So if you see, 15 days prior to his departure, his consciousness is so clear that he knows what needs to be done, and he's in the dham. He's not looking after. He's not looking for some kind of a treatment, trying to protect his body. In fact, he's completely conscious, Krishna conscious, and performing spiritual activities, focusing on the Lord in the last moments of his life. So the reason why this message becomes very important is it shows how the jiva, especially a spiritual master, how he's dependent on the Lord. He's not very keen to retain his body. He's very keen to retain his spiritual identity, which is nothing but dasanu dasanu dasa. He's the direct. He renders direct devotional service to the Lord. So he knows that whether in this world or in the next, he's always going to be serving the Supreme Lord. So he's not filled with anxiety. Although bodily there may be some weakness which is displayed, still he's not affected by these modes of material nature, or he's not worried about what is going to happen to this body. He's focusing on what needs to be done ahead so that he remembers the Lord and he is perfectly situated in consciousness. So to purify our consciousness is very important. And when we hear from these great souls, when we see these great souls performing these activities, that actually motivates us to do more. Usually what happens when some kind of a distress comes into our life, it becomes very difficult for us to actually even digest that we are going through that kind of a scenario, and we try to find solutions. But all we have to do is turn towards the Lord, and the Lord will do the needful. So there are different kinds of situations. So sometimes what happens, we try to fix one problem, but the new problem comes up. And what happens is when the new problem comes, we tend to forget the old problem. The problem may still exist, but because we got a new problem, we try to focus on the new problem, and we don't focus as much on the old problem that we had. So we would have seen these scenarios that there are multiple things which are happening in life. So we prioritize something and we ignore few. And if there were if there was only one problem, we would be focusing on that. But if there are multiple problems, we would prioritize on few and try to neglect a few. So the point here is that these problems will keep coming in life. This is not going to end. But the only solution is we have to get out of this body. We have to get out of this conditioned living, and we have to go back and surrender to the Supreme Lord. So at this point of time, we have to start practicing it. Only if we practice now, then at the time of death, when death attacks us, at that point of time, our consciousness will be perfect, and we will be able to give up this body and continue further the devotional service. So now some people may ask that, what is the guarantee that, the soul and the super soul both live in the same body? What is the guarantee? Can you guarantee me? So there are, actually, it's not just the soul and the super soul which lives in the body. There are many, many microorganisms also that live in the body. So it is not just two souls, but the Shastras are very clearly pointing about two souls, which are very important because our individual identity is based on our soul, so the individual soul which resides in this body. But within us, there are many microorganisms. Even within them, there is a soul. Even within them, there is a super soul. So there are so many living entities which actually will be living within our body as well. There are worms within our body. So they also have a soul. Within their heart also super soul is seated. So the Jiva, the Atma and the Paramatma are always there. The Paramatma is always there to guide the living entity. So we have to understand that this well-wisher and friend of ours is going to be there with us always, as long as we keep taking repeated births, and as long as we keep dying, we keep repeating how many of our cycles we take birth and death, the Paramatma is going to be along with us, and somehow he's trying to get us back to the spiritual world. So it is not just the Atma and the Paramatma which resides in the body, but there are many other organisms also which reside in the body, which are also guided by the Paramatma. Now, but the Shastras are specifically focusing about two birds, which are the conditioned living entity, conditioned soul, and the super soul. Because the most important thing Srila Prabhupada says for a devotee is at least we have to be selfish in the matter of spiritual life. Not selfish, to get some particular seva or get some position or get some prasadam more than others. Not selfish that way, but being selfish in the matter of executing devotional service. Being selfish means somebody who's always thinking about his own welfare. So the highest welfare, Srila Prabhupada says, the highest welfare that one can think for himself is nothing but rendering favorable devotional service to the Lord. And this we are understanding from the Shastras. And here also we see that Narada Muni is explaining the same thing to Prachina Barhi. So the highest activity that Prachina Barhi can do is rendering devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this Narada Muni wanted to explain. So now I was saying that the body has two occupants, one soul and the super soul. Sometimes people may ask, what is the proof that there is a soul and super soul? So there are many references in Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavatam, we can see that there is a verse which says, Bhagavan sarva bhuteshu lakshita swatmana harihi drishyer buddhyadibir drishya lakshaner anumapake. So Bhagavan sarva bhuteshu. So the verse very clearly says that the Supreme Lord is actually situated in every sarva bhuteshu. Sarva bhuteshu means he is situated in the heart of all living entities. Bhagavan sarva bhuteshu. Lakshita swatmana harihi. So Hari is situated in all the living entities. Now, not only that, we have to understand that the intelligence that we derive is also derived from the Lord. Sometimes when we tend to do something which is not in line with even the nature, material laws. For example, you're going in traffic, there's a lot of traffic, and on one side, there is, you see that on the other side, there is no traffic. You tend to go on the wrong side. So when you try to go on the wrong side, there is some kind of the intelligence from within. It gives you the signals that, you're doing the wrong activity. You may get caught. So we have experienced that it is not that we tend to make the wrong decision, but at the same time, there is an inner voice, there is an inner intelligence which guides us, telling that don't do this. You're doing the wrong activity. So that intelligence is nothing but the intelligence which is present within, and that intelligence is driven by the Lord. So we have to understand that the Lord is guiding us. The Lord is guiding the individual living entity, and He's seated and present in each and every living entity. Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu. Then there is also a reference in Bhagavad Gita. It says, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Pradesh Arjuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yantra Rudhani Mayaya. So Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam. So now in the previous verse, we are talking about Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu. Now we are talking about Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam. Now somebody may say, is there any difference between Bhagavan and Ishvara? So there is practically no difference between Bhagavan and Ishvara. Bhagavan is the speaker. If you see in Bhagavad Gita, all the verses recited by Lord Krishna is Bhagavan. So is Bhagavan. Ishvara Parama Krishna. Brahma says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha. Lord Brahma says. So we have to understand that Bhagavan, Ishvara is all the same. He is Supreme Lord Krishna. And at many places there is a reference given as Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam, which means that Ishvara is seated in everybody's heart. Some places it says that Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu. So Bhagavan is present in everyone's heart, Ishvara is present in everyone's heart. That Bhagavan or Ishvara is nothing but Lord Hari. So we can also, there is also a verse which says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which says, Tasmat Bharata Sarvatma Bhagavan Ishvaro Hari. So in that verse we see both Bhagavan, Ishvara, and it says it's Hari. So we can understand that it is Hari or Lord Krishna who seated in everybody's heart, and we have to realize him, and we have to understand that we have to render favorable spiritual service to the Lord. So that is exactly what is the message that is given here. Now there is also one, after understanding and meditating on that Supreme Lord, then what will we do? We have to render favorable devotional service to the Lord, because here Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is telling Cheto Darpana Marjanam. In this particular verse, in the purport, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying that Cheto Darpana Marjanam. So the dust which is accumulated in our heart from so many lifetimes, we have to actually clear that dust. So how will that happen? That will happen only by practicing devotional service. And will it happen just like that? It happens in the association of devotees. So we have to understand that when we render favorable devotional service in the association of devotees, then it becomes very easy to cleanse our heart. Also, the knowledge that we get, we should also know that here, after the 79th verse in this particular chapter, till the 79th verse, Narada Muni was instructing King Prachina Barhi. And in the 79th verse, he concludes telling that now Prachina Barhi has to render favorable devotional service to the Lord. After that conclusion, then what happens? This particular conversation is happening between Maitreya Rishi and Vidura. So the conversation is actually happening between Maitreya Rishi and Vidura, and in that discussion, these pastimes are narrated. So we have to understand that this is also association of devotees. So this is a Guru Shishya, basically a spiritual master instructing his disciple. And look at the conversation. They are not wasting time on materialistic talks. They are trying to understand what is the goal of life, and they are focusing their discussion on that. By doing that, one's heart gets purified. Shukadeva Goswami also says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the second canto, Shukadeva Goswami says that Etad evatma bhurajan naradaya viprachate veda garbho bhyadat sakshat yadaha hariratmanaha. He says that Etad evatma bhurajan. So Shukadeva Goswami is telling to Parikshit Maharaj that Atma Bhu, the firstborn, who is Brahma. So this Brahma he's called as Veda Garbha, which means the knowledge was revealed to him by the Supreme Lord. Brahma is born from the navel of Vishnu. So the knowledge was revealed to him. So that knowledge which was revealed by Vishnu to Brahma, and from Brahma to Narada, from Narada to Vyasadeva, and from Vyasadeva to his son, that is Parikshit Maharaj. That same knowledge I'm repeating now to you. So whatever knowledge I've heard, so this shows the importance of disciplic succession. So we all know that there are many verses, even in the Bhagavad Gita, which says that knowledge comes from disciplic succession. So the point here is that if you see whether it is Narada Muni who's speaking, or whether it is Parikshit Maharaj who's speaking, or whether it is Maitreya Rishi speaking to Vidura, they are all quoting that this knowledge they are getting from the disciplic succession. And we have to understand why this is being quoted repeatedly, is because when we are trying to rely on some information, that the source of that information should be known. Is the source authoritative? Is the source in line with what the Supreme Master or the Supreme Lord wants us to act as? So if the source is perfect, then our actions will be perfect. So that is the reason why, although we have 100% faith in the scriptures, we have 100% faith in Parikshit Maharaj, we have 100% faith in the instructions of Maitreya Rishi, and we have 100% faith in the instructions of Narada Muni to Prachina Barhi. Still, in each of their conversations, they always reiterate that this knowledge has been given to me by my spiritual master. The reason, one, you should always be lower than, you may be very knowledgeable, but still you're always lower than your spiritual master. Because without the presence of your spiritual master, your presence is invalid. So they are all reiterating, one, to glorify the Supreme Lord, second, to show the authority of the knowledge that they are passing on. They are not showing their authority, but they are showing the authoritative knowledge that they are passing on from generations, starting from Krishna. Okay? So this was about the verse basically. And finally, once the knowledge comes through disciplic succession, so we discussed that body is the conditioned soul is occupying a body of 9 gates, and the super soul is present within the body. Then we said the super soul is not only present within our body, but simultaneously present within all living entities. Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu, Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam. We discussed those 2 verses. So the super soul is present within us. We have to turn towards the super soul. We have to take instructions or guidance. The intelligence is driven. There are 2 kinds of intelligence. One is the material intelligence, which is Puranjana and Puranjani. If you are driven by your material intelligence, you may make wrong decisions, birth and death. But if you turn towards the Lord and take instructions of the Lord, then you can be freed from all anxiety and be relieved from repeated cycle of birth and death. And then to do that, you should be in the association of devotees, render favorable devotional service, and the knowledge that you get and the association that you get should be backed by Shastras, authoritative Shastras, which are coming from disciplic succession. So we know the verse which says that Satam Prasanga Mama Virya Samvido Bhavanti Kritkarna Rasayana Katha Tad Joshana Dashva Upavarga Vartmani Shraddha Ratir Bhaktir Anukramishati. So what happens? If we follow an order, what happens in the association of pure devotees? Satam Prasangan Mama Virya Samvido. So the wonderful activities of Krishna are actually discussed in the favorable association of devotees. So in the association of devotees, what happens? There is always discussion. Mama Virya Samvido, where wonderful activities of Lord Krishna, his pastimes, are discussed in the association of devotees. And when that discussion happens, it becomes very pleasing. One, the places from where we hear is the ear. The ear hears it, and it becomes very pleasing. It is nectar for the ears. If you tell ordinary materialists that we have to drink something through the ear, they cannot understand. But if you see here, we are drinking nectar through the ears because the knowledge is passed on to us. Then we hear that it becomes very pleasing to the ear and the heart. Bhavanti hrit karna rasayana katha tad joshana dashva apavarga vartmani shraddha ratir bhaktir anukramishati. So when that happens, when you drink this nectar through the ears and when your heart is pleased, then what happens? Immediately you are freed from all anxiety and you become fixed and attracted to the Lord. And this way, the real devotion and the devotional service begins in the association of devotees. Now, after doing this, now there is also, you're in the association of devotees, you're hearing the pastimes of the Lord. There is a task that we have to do. The task that we have to do is, in this, in the previous verse, the 84th verse, in the purport, we can see that we have to constantly keep remembering the Lord. And how do we constantly remember the Lord? We have to remember the Lord. In the previous verse, it is said that we have to chant. Prabhu, if you don't mind, can you go to the previous verse? In the previous verse, in the 84th verse, you can see that it is mentioned very clearly that we have to always think of the Lord. How is that practically possible? That Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport. If you just scroll down, Prabhu, in the purport, there is a mention which says very clearly, there is a sentence which says very clearly, after Cheto Darpana Marjanam, the more we talk of Krishna, think of Krishna, and preach for Krishna, then what happens? Cheto Darpana Marjanam happens. Our heart gets cleansed by talking more of Krishna, thinking more of Krishna, and preaching about Krishna. So this reminds me of this particular composition of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And in the Nadiya Godrume, the Vaishnava prayer, in one of the Vaishnava bhajans, Nadiya Godrume Vityananda Mahajan Patiya Chenam Hate Jivera Karan Bolo Krishna Bhajo Krishna Karo Krishna Shiksha Bolo Krishna Bhajo Krishna Karo Krishna Shiksha. He says this, Bolo Krishna Bhajo Krishna Karo Krishna Shiksha. So Bolo Krishna, which means a chant, keep chanting whenever you find time, not whenever you find time. Actually, it is always Satatam kirtayantam. We have to keep chanting always. That is why we are practicing. Actually, 16 rounds is minimum. Srila Prabhupada never said stop at 16 rounds. In fact, it was continuous. You have to keep chanting every moment in your life. And where will you get the determination from? You have to do these activities. One, you have to keep chanting. Second, bhajo Krishna. You should worship the Lord. Then, karo Krishna shiksha. When you start teaching or preaching about the glories of the Supreme Lord, then automatically you will also be motivated to chant and perform or worship devotional service or worship the Supreme Lord favorably. So, bolo Krishna, bhajo Krishna, karo Krishna shiksha. This is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. Even in this verse, Srila Prabhupada has written the same thing. He says that the more we talk of Krishna, think of Krishna, and preach for Krishna, the more we become purified. The more we connect with the Supreme Lord, the more we understand the Supreme Lord, the more we become purified. How and what is the guarantee? There is a verse in Bhagavad Gita which says, Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. We know this verse. Ame vaishasi yuktaivam atmanam yat mat parayanaha. So the point here is that Krishna has guaranteed that we should not worry, is the heart getting cleansed or not? All we have to do is three things, which is the more we talk of Krishna, think of Krishna, and preach for Krishna. These three things, automatically we should not be worried. What is the result? We are not in the business of getting results. We are in the business of doing the activity which is prescribed in the Shastras, which is prescribed by the Guru Parampara. So here it is said that we have to chant, that is, we have to talk of Krishna, think of Krishna, and preach for Krishna. Then what is the result we get? The result is already given for granted. It is mentioned in the verse which I said just now, Man mana bhava mad bhakto, atmanam mat parayana, which means that if you always think of me, if you become my devotee, and if you offer obeisances to me and worship me, then since you're always absorbed in me or Krishna, when you're always absorbed in Krishna, then surely you will come to me. So Krishna has guaranteed that if you do this activity repeatedly and regularly throughout your life, then surely you will come to me. So we don't have to be worried about the result. The result will be given if the process is followed. So the process has been mentioned here. So to summarize this particular verse, it is very clear here that an entire allegory of Puranjana and Puranjani was shared by Narada Muni to Prachina Barhi to make him realize that the goal of life is finally to render devotional service to the Lord and please the Lord and return back to the abode of the Lord. So, in short, to summarize the steps that we discuss now, first, we should know that the knowledge is coming from disciplic succession. We should, first of all, we should know that there are two individuals seated in this body, the most important ones, who are the conditioned living entity and the super soul. The conditioned living entity can be driven by material intelligence, but that will lead to repeated birth and death. But if the same conditioned living entity, if it turns towards the Lord, who's the comparison we gave, we said that two birds are seated on the same tree, and one is observing and the other one is busy in doing activities. So one is not affected by the activities, but he's busy observing, and that is the super soul. He's busy observing what are we doing daily? Are we doing something beneficial for us? And I was also talking about selfishness of a devotee. He should be very selfish in the matter of executing spiritual activities, because he should always think of the highest welfare of others, but at the same time, the most important thing is he should also be selfish enough in understanding what is the highest welfare for himself. And how can he execute that? He can execute that in favorable association. And by discussing in favorable association, what happens? In favorable association, we discuss pastimes of the Lord, which are very pleasing to the ear and the heart. And in this process, what happens? We constantly remember the Lord, we chant, we glorify the Lord, we preach about the Lord, then our heart gets cleansed, we get purified, and we become eligible candidates to go back to Godhead. So that was the crux of the first verse. Now we go to the second verse. We'll go to the next verse, which is the 85th verse. And in this verse, the verse goes like this: Adhyatma parokshamidam mayadigatam adbhutam evam striya shrama pumsa chinna mutra cha samshaya. So adhyatma, spiritual, paroksham, described by authority. Idam, this. Maya, by me. It's not Maya, Maya, by me. Adigatam, heard. Adbhutam, wonderful. Evam, thus, Striya, with a wife. Ashrama, shelter. Pumsa, of the living entity. Chinna, finished. Amutra, about life after death. Cha also samshaya, death. Samshaya, doubt. Translation: the allegory of King Puranjana described herein, according to authority, was heard by me from my spiritual master. So if you see here in the first line itself, I was telling you in the last verse that everyone is actually telling that I have heard it from my spiritual master. They are actually giving in all the conversations, if you see, whether it is Maitreya Vidura. Now, in this particular verse, it is the pastimes of Puranjana has already been concluded in the 79th verse. The pastimes of the discussions between Narada Muni and Prachina Barhi has already concluded. And Narada Muni has given his verdict to Prachina Barhi, telling that you have to do loving devotional service to the Lord. That conclusion is given. But even Narada Muni actually always glorifies his spiritual master. Similarly, Maitreya Rishi is glorifying here his spiritual master. He's saying Parashara Muni. I heard this from Parashara Muni. He says, the allegory of King Puranjana described herein, according to the authority, was heard by me from my spiritual master. So here, Maitreya Rishi is telling to Vidura that I heard this from my spiritual master. And it is full of spiritual knowledge. If one can understand the purpose of this allegory, so we have to understand here that it is mentioned in the purport that you have to understand the purpose of this allegory. It is not to hear and forget. We have to understand. Now we mentioned the different steps in the previous verse. We have to understand that that is me. There is no, the Puranjana is me, myself. So I have to learn, understand what I need to do so that I can be successful in this life. So here in this verse, it's saying that if one can understand the purpose of this allegory, he'll certainly be relieved from the bodily conception. If you understand this concept of Puranjana, Puranjani, and what is happening in this pastime, although the message is for Prachina Barhi, if we understand it clearly, then what happens? He will be certainly relieved from the bodily conception and will clearly understand life after death. Although one may not understand what transmigration of the soul actually is, one can fully understand it by studying this narration. So we may hear that the soul transmigrates from one body to another, just like how the soul migrates from childhood to youth to adult and old age. Similarly, at the time of death, the soul moves to another body. We hear that. Practically, we are not able to see the soul. We accept, we have faith in the scriptures. We don't see the soul because soul is spiritual in nature. With the material vision, we will not be able to see. And we have to realize it. That is self-realization. So here, in this particular verse, it is mentioned that it will be known to us only through spiritual master, and by the mercy of spiritual master and by the mercy of the devotees of the Lord, it will be known to us. All these things. Otherwise, it will always be a samshaya. We'll always be doubtful of this. And for a person who is always doubtful, he has no hope either in this life or in the next life. Tell me what else is better than this? Whatever you hear in the material world, we got so much of education. From all that education, are we getting the purpose of life? Are we getting the satisfaction that we want? We are not. But here, if we are in the association of devotees, we are executing favorable devotional service. And at the end of life, at least we can be satisfied that we didn't do anything which is adverse, which causes harm to other living entities, which causes harm to the nature or surroundings around us. And that itself gives a lot of peace. The Srila Prabhupada said that, somebody asked Prabhupada the question that, we are doing so much for Krishna, and at the end of the life, if we come to know that there is nobody called Krishna or there is nothing called Krishna, then what is it? Then what will we get out of all performing all these four regulative principles, chanting and doing all these things? So Srila Prabhupada said, at least, first of all, there is no question of no Krishna. There is no question of that. Still, even, let me take your example. Even if you say that there is no Krishna, still you would have led a wonderful life. Even in this life, if you go back, look back in your life, you would be gambling or eating meat or causing so much of distress to the society and surroundings, causing distress to yourself. All that is avoided by coming into devotional service. So you're already safe. Forget what happens next, whether you will go back to the abode of Krishna or not. This life you've led a very beautiful life. So this Srila Prabhupada said. Okay, so we'll read the purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The word striya, meaning along with the wife, is significant. The male and female living together constitute the sum and substance of material existence. Material existence, the attraction between male and female in this material world is very strong. In all species of life, the attraction between male and female is the basic principle of existence, the same principle of intermingling is also in human society, but in a regulative form. Material existence means living together as male and female and being attracted by one another. However, when one fully understands spiritual life, his attraction for the opposite sex is completely vanquished. By such attraction, one becomes overly attached to this material world. It is a hard knot within the heart. Pumsa striya mithuni bhavametam tayor mitho hridaya granthi mahu ato griha kshetra sutapta vitter janasya moho yamaham ameti. So this verse is there in the Bhagavatam. The reference is given. It says Pumsa striya mithuni bhavametam. The attraction between male and female. Pumsa is nothing but male. Striya is female. Mithuni bhavam, attraction for sexual life. So Pumsa striya mithuni bhavametam. It says between male and female, there is always attraction for sexual life. And that is the basis of misconception. That causes illusion, and that causes repetition of birth, and that causes entanglement. So when this is known, an intelligent person tries to avoid it. Or if he still is not able to avoid it, we have the Grihastha ashram. So you can enter the Grihastha ashram and you can do it in a regulated way. That is what Srila Prabhupada is telling here in the purport. That there is, in the human society, in the human life, there is regulation possible. You don't have to discard it, but you can use it favorably in the service of one. You're not satisfying your senses, you're satisfying the Supreme Lord. You can use it favorably by having Krishna conscious children. Like you see here, that the lineage of Prithu Maharaj, we have Prachetas. The Prachetas are so devoted to the instructions of their father that whatever, if some father tells his son, go to the forest and meditate for 10,000 years. Nowadays, can any child accept it? These kind of instructions. But if you see the lineage, if it is strong, the parampara is strong, and if they have perfect knowledge, then it becomes very easy to execute devotional service. The children will not challenge the parents, telling that, what are you telling me? Why should I go to the forest and meditate? Although in this day and age, it is not possible for us to go to the forest and meditate, but we have a very simple activity. Bolo Krishna, Karo Krishna, Bhajo Krishna. That's all. Our acharyas are just telling this. The chant, then worship, and preach. 3 things we have to do. That's all. Very simple. And sit wherever. I'm sitting in my house now. You're also sitting in your house. And we are engaged in devotional service. So, Kalyuga, there are a lot of doshas fully placed here because we are practicing little bit of devotional service. And we have to do more and more. That is the expectation of Acharya. So here, we see that the cause of bondage in the material world is Pumsa, Striya, Mithuni, Bhavametam. So this world is called as Maithunya Agara. Srila Prabhupada says in many of the Bhagavad Gita verses also, Maithunya Agara, which means that this world is like a prison house, which is the result of sex life. So we are shackled by sex life in this material world. So we have to break that. If we have complete knowledge, we can break that. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that Avritam Jnanam Etina, knowledge or the intelligence, what happens? It gets polluted. The pure consciousness of a person, it gets polluted by the eternal enemy. Jnanino Nitya Vairina. Nitya Vairina means constant. He is the eternal enemy. The biggest enemy that anybody has is not in your external, it is within. Jnanino Nitya Vairina. Lust. This lust. Kama Rupena Kaunteya. Dushpurena Nalenacha. This lust cannot be satisfied. How much ever you add fuel, how much ever you try to satisfy this desire of lust, the lusty desires, how much ever you try to satisfy, it never gets satisfied. It is like adding fuel to the fire. It asks for more and more, and that becomes the cause of bondage. So that is what is specifically mentioned in this verse. So then what is the hope? If we are shackled by this lusty desires, by these sexual desires, then what is the hope? What is the hope? The hope is very simple. The hope is Vishaya Vinivartante Niraharasya Dehina Rasavarjam Rasopasya Param Drishtva Nivartate. So we may be shackled, but the Lord gives solution. 1, withdraw the senses like a tortoise. Before this, the verse which I recited, the previous verse says that you should withdraw your senses like a tortoise. When the tortoise senses danger, it immediately withdraws all its senses. It withdraws all its limbs. It tries to protect itself. Similarly, when we sense that there is danger, what is danger? Danger is the shackle of sex life. This bondage, this attraction to sex life is causing repeated birth and death. I don't want to die once. Even now somebody asks that, you're going to die this moment. we become fearful. I don't want to die once, but we are ready to accept repeated birth and death by engaging in sex life or by engaging in lusty activities. So we have to be very intelligent. What we have to do? Vishaya vinivartante. It is not easy that, just like how the tortoise analogy is given, we cannot suddenly withdraw the senses. The senses are so powerful, it will drag you. Although you try to forcibly control them, still drags you. So what should you do? Vishaya vinivartante, nirahara siddhina, rasavarjam. So when you give a higher activity, don't restrict the activity. In fact, engage the activity for a higher purpose. So like I said, lusty desires may be there between man and woman, but one, you should see the another woman as a wife if she is not married to you, and your wife is not an object, or your husband is not an object to please your senses. It is for rendering favorable devotional service to the Lord. So as a husband and wife, you should produce Krishna conscious children, raise them in the matter of religion, and then you can see, just like how the Prachitas were well established in the matter of religion, there will be a good society around us. The more Krishna conscious children we have, the more favorable society we will have. We will actually, right now, if you are struggling in this world, the struggle is because we don't have many Krishna conscious children, or we don't have many Krishna conscious parents. So the more we have Krishna conscious people around us, our life becomes more easy. Otherwise, it becomes more difficult. So we have to make that choice. So in conclusion of this verse, everyone comes to the material world. It is written here in the last paragraph. Everyone comes to this material world attracted to sense gratification. And the hard knot of sense gratification is the attraction between male and female. By this attraction, one becomes overly attached to the material world in terms of graha, kshetra, sutta, apta, vitta. So in the process, we may be thinking that we are not so attached. If we just steal one of these five things, if I steal your home, steal land, I'm not going to steal, but I'm just telling that if by the action of the material nature, if somebody steals your home, land, children, friends, money, immediately you get very unsettled. So that should not happen. That shows a sign of attachment, attached to your house, land, children. So better be in the association of devotees. When we hear these pastimes, it becomes very easy. Now here, whether we want it or not, one day all these things will be snatched from us. When death comes, Krishna says that I come in the form of death. And at the time, people who are not, who don't follow religious scriptures anyway, their life will end. And I come in the form of death. So now when death comes, automatically our home, our land, our children, our friends and money, nothing, nobody is going to rescue us. So we have to be very careful how much level of attachment we need to have for all these things. Thus, one becomes entangled in the bodily conception of I and mine. However, if one understands the story of King Puranjana and understands how by sexual attraction Puranjana became a female in his next life, one will also understand the process of transmigration. So there's a special note which is mentioned here. According to Vijayadhvaja Tirtha, one who belongs to Madhvacharya Sampradaya, the first two of the following verses appear after verse 45 of this chapter, and the remaining two verses appear after verse 79. So it is following verses. It says the following verses. That means after this, there are four verses which are which are discussed. So those verses in the Madhvacharya Sampradaya, one of the Acharya Sampradaya Acharyas, Vijayadhvaja Tirtha, he has mentioned that these additional verses are also mentioned by him in his recording of the scriptures. So that is also discussed here. Srila Prabhupada has added that also here so that we don't miss out the additional information which is favorable even for us, all the devotees who are here. So I'd like to conclude here telling that whatever we summarize now, one is, the Puranjana is nothing but we ourselves. Although the discussion is between Narada Muni and Prachina Barhi, still the discussion is for our benefit. We are trapped in the city of 9 gates, but we have a savior who's a super soul. And once we turn towards him, how can we turn towards him? We can turn towards him by understanding that he is the well-wisher of everyone. First, we should have faith in the scriptures. We should have favorable association, and we should have the right knowledge which comes with the cyclic succession. Then Bolo Krishna, Bhajo Krishna, Karo Krishna. We should execute it properly. Once we execute it properly, then Cheto Dharpana Marjanam, our heart gets cleansed. Once the heart gets cleansed, we become free from material desires. Then Krishna is guaranteed in Bhagavad Gita, Manmana Bhava Madbhakto. In that verse, Krishna says that if you are always engaged in my service, you will definitely come to me. There is no doubt. And in the second verse, we discuss that the dangerous thing in material world is sex life or the lusty desires that we have. If we have to conquer it, it can be conquered by knowledge, the spiritual knowledge. or engaging your senses for a higher activity which causes liberation rather than bondage. So we conclude here, we stop here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you so much. I think we've been hearing this particular allegorical story for the last 3 months, over 3 months, I think. And it really gives us an in-depth meaning in a very practical way to an example of what happened to King, in the name of King Puranjana and Puranjani. The entire story comes in that way. It's very beautiful. And thanks for the wonderful description of this entire thing, clarifying that. In fact, you took that example of His Holiness Karam Kana Swami Maharaj very recently, and really, leading that, the state of consciousness one should be. And you rightly put to say it cannot just happen towards the end. You have to practice it right through. Super soul is always there. If we can cheat the super soul, he's super of everything. So it's just not possible to do that. And you also mentioned about the highest welfare activity is actually for oneself to render devotional service. And you also talked about the importance of discipline succession. It comes time and again that the source, every time, at least I keep getting this doubt time and again to say, hey, it is happening, or it's really, it doesn't really exist correction. But then discipline succession and the source, which is very, very important, is a big reaffirmation that, what we have heard. And as you said, you are in the right traffic area, right? You're saying, in the right direction. That is very, very important, and it's very reassuring, as Prabhupada put it. Even if there is no Krishna, there is no problem, because you have led a very blissful life. So why do you even think of all those things and confuse yourself? And you brought the sequence also very nicely in terms of how the soul and super soul exist in the body, and how material and spiritual intelligence is there, how super soul observing things, and then there are selfish interests. And most important, again and again, which is emphasized, is association with devotees. And then what do we do while associating with devotees is constantly remember Krishna. And that really concludes the entire thing. And you talked about how like a tortoise we should be withdrawing our senses. And the biggest bondage is attraction between male and female. So we must use the Grihasthashrama also in rendering devotional service together. That's a wonderful point. Thank you so much, Prabhu. With that, I would just stop. I've been speaking quite a lot. I'll just open the lines for the devotees to share their learning as well as their comments or any questions.
Yes, Prabhu. Anybody has questions or any feedback? I'm sure that, because we are discussing 1 or 2 verses over a long time.
One feedback I have, Prabhu, that you should keep often.
I don't get you. What did you say?
I said you should come more often and give association.
I'll try to.
Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, Prabhu. Please go on.
Okay. Nobody has questions? So my professor used to say that if you have no questions, either you have understood everything or you have understood nothing. So I hope you have understood everything. And most important thing is, even in this verse, if you see in the previous verse, it says that it's not about hearing the pastime of Puranjana and Puranjani. It's about understanding that pastime. So if you understand and execute it in our own lives, I want to execute it in my life. And if it happens, then we become successful. So thank you very much. If you have no questions, we close today.
Little outside. Who is the guru of Maitreya Muni, Prabhu? He was a disciple of him. Huh?
Parashara.
Parashara Muni. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll conclude here, Prabhu. If you allow, Vancha Kalpataru Yascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Ananta Koti Vaishnava Bandaki Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.
Prabhu, there were a couple of Matajis who had basically thanked for your wonderful class. One was Putra Mataji, I can see here. Also saw from Prema Priya Mataji, also for a wonderful class. You want to thank you. So tomorrow we'll be.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I think we are all reading from his purport, connecting here and there from his verses. So I thank Srila Prabhupada and all the devotees here. Thank you, all of you, for attending.
Thank you. And I would just like to remind everybody that tomorrow we'll have a class starting only at 8:30 from temple. Don't switch on at 7:15. So I just want to tell you, on Sundays we'll have at 8:30 only. Thank you for joining, despite having it at 7:15. Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.